Hey everybody, it's Dan, and as the title of this video implies, I want to talk a bit about Pet Sematary today. Now, many of you who know me personally likely know that I am hardly Stephen King's biggest fan. Really just kind of don't enjoy the majority of what I have read by him. Now, that's not trying to knock down, people who are big fans of his work. I can see the appeal of what he writes. Some of it's a little spooky and everything, but for me, most of what he has written that I have read really just seemed way too similar. Um, all of it was just very, it seemed very cookie cutter, um, repetitive, and personally, I can count on exactly 10 fingers how many of his books I have read that I genuinely enjoyed. Um, 8 of them are the Dark Tower novels. Those are fantastic if you ever get a chance to read them. I highly recommend it. There's the 7 numbered ones in the series, and then there's The Wind Through the Keyhole, which was written much later and takes place between the 4th and 5th books. But it's mostly just one of the characters telling a story that took place in the world, but wasn't actually a story about them, the main characters of the series so much. Um, there was Bag of Bones, which, even though I thought it was, very similar to a lot of what he wrote, you know, oh, imagine that. It's about an author. It still ended up being pretty good. And I liked, especially the bit about those of you who have read it or at least seen that made-for-television movie starring Pierce Brosnan should remember the letters on the door of the refrigerator, spelling out words and messages and whatnot. I thought that was good, and the whole thing about him missing his wife and everything was very good, and that ties into a little bit what I'm going to be talking about today, which is Pet Sematary. That's that 10th book on my 10 fingers, which without a doubt, beyond any stretch of the imagination, is my absolute favorite novel that I have read by Stephen King. And personally, other people's opinions may vary, and that's fine, but personally, I find it to be the single best modern horror novel ever written. By modern, I mean, within my lifetime, it is the greatest novel greatest horror novel, I should say, that has ever been written. Obviously, long before my lifetime, I am personally a pretty big fan of H.P. Lovecraft and Brian Lumley and some others from way back then. August Derleth. Really enjoy their work. I do think that it is superior to King's, but in this one instance, Stephen King really knocked it out of the park. I want to explain exactly why this novel is so special to me and holds such a dear place in my heart. Um, when I was very young, about I believe I was 13 years old. I was at my grandparents' house, and they always had big boxes full of books. And invariably there were Stephen King novels, strewn throughout them. That's how I first discovered The Gunslinger from the Dark Tower series. Um, One of the books that was there, all tattered up and torn cover and everything, just happened to be the first printing of Pet Sematary in paperback, which I still have. In fact, I have purchased, because I love the book so much, I have purchased every single version, every single printing of that book that I could get my hands on, and yet, despite that, I've only ever read two of them. Um, I read that one back then when I was about 13 years old. Um, I was into, scary, spooky things at the time, and I had already read The Gunslinger at the time, so I figured, how bad could it be? And at that time, I didn't think too much about it. It was a good story. It was scary. It dealt with, dead things coming back to life and things like that. I rather enjoyed it, but I didn't really get it. I didn't really understand why someone would consider it so horrifically frightening that it was a bestseller or anything. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I was just like, well, this is good, yeah, but that's about it. And I set that copy down and just kind of forgot about it. I have it actually this back room behind me here. It's right in there. But it wasn't until many years later. Um, let's see, about 3 years ago, if I'm not mistaken, possibly four, but at least 3 years ago, that I picked up another copy of it. Because I have this habit, I always read, some sort of horror novel, during October. Um, so I picked it up. Uh, it had like the title and everything in green, and a picture of cat's eyes on the cover and everything. It was just a small, regular size mass market paperback. Um, Decided I would pick that up and read that, just read it again during October. Um, and it was vastly different for me the second time around, and genuinely frightening, like horrifically so. I was having horrible nightmares. I didn't sleep if I could help it. Tons of sleepless nights, and I was in college at the time studying chemistry, and I had to study for that and everything. And I mean, it took me a few months to get through this book because I reached a point in it where it was just absolutely terrifying, and I couldn't handle it at the time. Um, Now, there were other factors at play while I was reading it that second time around that I'm sure definitely affected it. Right around Thanksgiving of that year, a friend of mine and his young child both passed away in a house fire. And that, really, I mean, I was reading that novel at the same time, and it really just, it hit me hard. Um, Between me being 13 and the time that I was reading that, I became a father. My daughter was 2 years old at the time, the same age as the small boy in the novel. Now, let me give you kind of a rundown on the novel for those of you who haven't read it or seen the old version of the film or seen the new version of the film that's in theaters here now. Um, Basically, this doctor, it's not an author this time. thank God. This doctor ends up moving his family from Baltimore, Maryland, to a small town called Ludlow in Maine, because of course it's a Stephen King novel. Everything has to take place in Maine. But anyway, in the novel, there's this gas company called Orinco. Their trucks are just going past this house that they moved it to, out in the middle of nowhere. Ridiculous high speeds, day in and day out, just all the time. These big gas trucks just flying down the road. And they have a next door neighbor, Judd, old man Judd Crandall. The main character, by the way, the doctor, his name is Lewis Creed. It's the Creed family that this story is about. So they move into this new house out in the middle of nowhere in Ludlow, Maine, and they see that there's all these trucks going by at ridiculous speeds all the time. It's a very, very unsafe and dangerous road. And then while Judd is kind of giving them the grand tour of some of their property, because they bought a good 50 acres out here that just this one little farmhouse that they live in is on. They end up kind of going back further into the woods, and they find this Pet Sematary, spelled incorrectly on the sign, of course, because it was spelled by children who were burying their pets there. And yeah, like it's basically the local, the town pet graveyard, hence the name, where the kids bring their dead pets and bury them, give them like a little, funerary service, whatever the case may be, and that's that. Well, eventually, the Creed family cat, Winston Churchill, they call him Church for short, ends up getting hit by one of the Orinco trucks. And in the novel, at least, Judd alludes to the fact that the vast majority of the animals that are in that cemetery are, their death was caused by these trucks. Well, Judd can tell how much Lewis really loves his daughter, who the cat belonged to, and Judd really likes the family too. So he kind of gambles with himself and decides, you know what, because I don't want this little girl to be upset, I'm going to show Lewis not the pet cemetery where, everybody buries their pets, but instead we're going to go beyond this deadfall of trees at the edge of the pet cemetery and into, further back into their property, where, through the swamp and into, I guess what used to be an old Native American burial ground. Very rocky, stony ground. It's really hard to dig, but eventually Lewis digs the hole and puts the cat in there, buries it, puts a little cairn on top. That's very important, a mound of stones. And they leave. The following day, Church is back. Now, that might not seem too frightening. I mean, it could be that maybe, they just didn't realize that the cat wasn't dead, okay, whatever. But looks pretty dead to me, and the description of it in the book, seems awfully dead. I've seen dead cats before. I've seen a lot of different dead things before. Sounded dead to me. Well, he ends up, coming back. But he's a little bit off, a little bit different. Hisses a lot, gets angry pretty easily. Just things are different. It's the same cat. It seems like it's the same cat, but not quite. Now, Lewis, by this point, has already told his wife, Rachel, that the cat died. Um, the cat, obviously, is not dead, so she just assumes that it must have been a mistake. But Lewis knows, and Judd knows the cat was dead. Lewis goes over, talks to Judd, and of course, here's the story about how Judd one time decided to bury his, dead dog that his dad had to put down up there, and the dog came back and had to be put down again because it had a mean streak and everything. Now, eventually, it gets to the point that was really difficult for me to read the second time around, and that was Gage, the 2-year-old child of Lewis and Rachel Creed, ends up running into the road and gets hit by one of the trucks and dies. It was really difficult for me to get through. I thought that was the worst that it could get, but I was wrong. Because, of course, Lewis goes to Judd, and Judd knows what he's thinking. And Lewis just asks him if anybody's ever buried a person there before. Now, in the novel, Judd tells him a couple of things. He tells him about a bull that had, been buried there and come back and had to be put down. And then he tells him about Timmy Baterman. Timmy Baterman was the only child of a guy in town. Timmy was killed in the Vietnam War. His body was brought back and buried, and Timmy's father decided to dig him up and bring him out there. And the thing was, he came back, but it wasn't exactly Timmy. It was something that knew things that it shouldn't, and would look people dead in the eye and see their souls and tell them things that it had no right knowing. And it terrified everybody. And everybody knew, because they had seen the body. They had seen he was shot. They knew he was dead and buried. They knew that there was something that wasn't quite right with the new Timmy Baterman. So, as much as his father was trying as hard as he possibly could to prevent them from doing it, and he didn't want to believe that anything was wrong, and he just wanted his son back, and he had him back now, and he was happy with it, even though things weren't quite right, and he knew it. The people still ended up, basically going out there and killing Timmy Baterman and his father. They said it was just absolutely horrific and wrong, and nothing like that should ever happen. And from the sound of it, they were right. So basically he said, Judd said that no matter what, do not bury your child there. Do not let him come back that way, because it will not be him that comes back. It will be his body, but it will be something else. Now, at that point, Lewis was already, he knew what he was going to do. And he had his mind made up already. So he had drugged Judd. Judd fell asleep. He had already sent his wife and his daughter out to his in-laws' home. And there was this whole chapter or so where he and the in-laws were fighting because they said it was his fault because he didn't pay attention to the child and this and that. That neither of the two films have really put in there. But anyway, he does that, and there's just this whole long portion of the book that may not be as long as I'm making it sound, but it certainly seemed long to me trying to get through it, where he's running through his everything in his mind, and he keeps changing his mind and changing it back, and it really just brought out the fear in me of, doing whatever I could possibly do for my child, to protect my child, to have my child and make sure that my child is happy and content and alive and healthy. And, I just kept thinking about my daughter and thinking about things that could, happen to her. We never think about death until we learn that we're not going to live forever. And once we find out that we're not going to live forever, we want to. Most of us, anyway. And death becomes a fear of ours. Now, eventually, at least for, in my personal life, I had a child, and I didn't exactly get over that. I still want to be able to spend as much time as possible with her, but I look out more for her life than I do my own. And just as all of this was going on in Lewis's mind, I found myself thinking, what would I do in this situation? Would I do what Lewis is doing, or would I let her rest? Would I let my daughter rest, or would I let the desire to have her with me overwhelm me? And would I go and dig her up and take her to this place that I knew could bring her back, just so that I could have her back again? And the thing that terrified me so much about it, and the thing that made me just absolutely love this book, but the thing that makes me know that after that second time reading it, I don't think I will ever be able to read it a third time, was the fact that, was the realization that I don't know. I don't know if I could just let her rest. I don't know that I wouldn't bring her to that place just to see her again, just to have her back. And the fact that I didn't know that terrified me. I was having nightmares of her death. It was a very grueling experience. And then having, a friend and his very young first child, son, pass away at that same time, just everything coming down like that really just messed with my mind at that time. And I was absolutely terrified of this novel. I didn't actually end up finishing it. I started it in October 1st, and usually I'm a very quick reader. I can finish up, barring work and schools and things like that, I can finish up a novel in, a few days to a week, depending. Not this time. I started it October 1st. I didn't finish it until well after Thanksgiving. It was in like mid-December that I finally managed to finish it and feel comfortable, continuing to read it. It was bad. It was very frightening. But of course, it was made into a film. And, back in, the 90s, it was made into a film. And it was a good film overall. It had, I can't remember his name, but the guy who played Herman Munster in The Munsters was Judd Crandall. And overall, it was good. I enjoyed the movie. I enjoy the movie and can still watch it because it doesn't have that hesitation, that worry, that fear. It's about an hour and a half long. You can't really, not only can you not really put that internal monologue and that internal just conflict within one man's heart in a movie, but you really couldn't do this full novel justice in an hour and a half time span. It's just not going to happen. Um, but it followed the story as closely as it could. It did mention the fact that there was a point when Judd's wife was had passed away, that Judd actually, she passed away in the home, and Judd took her to the cemetery, and the Indian Native American cemetery, and buried her there. Um, it mentioned that briefly in that when Gage comes back and is attacking Judd, he tells Judd, you effed with me once. Did you really think I would let you eff with me again? I mean, it's pretty brutal. Um, I think before that point, it had only kind of hinted at what happened to his wife, but then at that point, it made it very, very clear that yeah, he did in fact bury his wife in that cemetery, and he had just the cemetery had some sort of mystique about it, that just no matter what, even knowing what would happen, it would somehow draw you back anyway. Um, and of course, the film and the novel both end with Gage ends up killing Rachel, the mother, um, but Lewis, well, and also he kills Judd. But Lewis ends up killing him, again, and burning down Judd's house, but then taking Rachel and burying her in the cemetery, and she comes back, and that's pretty much the end of the novel and the original film. Getting into the new film, though, which I just finished watching, it is a good film. I have some kind of, nostalgia naturally for the original. It was the one that came out when I was growing up, when I was younger. It just, it kind of hit me, and it was a thing. I even sort of like the sequel to the original. It's a terrible movie, but it's a terribly good movie, I guess is the only way I can describe it. It's not even remotely frightening, but I don't know, there's just something about it that I enjoy. Um, again, just for nostalgia's sake. Well, in the new film, things change. Um, it's pretty different. There are some things that change for the better, there are some things that change for the worse. I love the fact that they included, in the novel, there's talk about um, the Wendigo legend, and they briefly include that in this. And there's a whole point in the novel where he's walking through the woods to get to the burial ground, and he keeps hearing things and seeing things in the woods and he's pretty sure it's this Wendigo spirit chasing him, trying to live within something, and it does briefly give that sensation in the film as he's bringing his dead loved one to the cemetery, well, to the burial ground rather, um, and he's looking around, and there's a point where you can actually see sort of like the outline of a figure, in the woods, which is pretty cool. I enjoyed that very much because I'm a big fan of Native American myths and legends and things. So it was nice to see that actually depicted in this film, unlike in the original film. Um, One thing that I really had a major issue with, though, that really just kind of hit me hard, was the fact that they changed which child died, because Lewis and Rachel also have a daughter named Ellie, who's older than Gage. She's 9, and on her birthday, at her birthday party, she is the one who ends up seeing the cat in the road and runs out to go get the cat. And you know, Gage also runs out into the road, and you think, especially, for those of us who have read the novel and or seen the old, the original film, you think that you are about to see Gage get hit by the truck, because that's what happens. And at the last second, Lewis manages to grab Gage, but the trucker hits the air brake, swerves out of control. The trailer, the gas trailer flies off, and the gas trailer is what ends up hitting Ellie and killing her. Um, and that just having a daughter of my own, uh, it kind of hit a little bit harder seeing that than in the original. Not that seeing a 2-year-old child, die in a film wasn't horrific, but just, it's different when you're seeing this, you have a daughter, and so you can identify with the father of a daughter losing his daughter just a little bit more than you can with one losing his son, I guess. Now, things may vary, person to person, but that was just my personal feelings on it. So that hit me hard. I really didn't like that change. That was, I don't know, that was kind of rough. And from then on, it was still kind of rough. She comes back, and there's a whole sequence where he is giving her a bath. He is brushing her hair, and her hair is coming out in clumps, and just he, kind of moves some of the hair, and he sees, the staples down the back of her head from, the embalming and preparation process and everything. Uh, and I mean, that just made me think of when I, brush my daughter's hair. It's just something I like to do, spending time with her and everything. And it was pretty rough. And then he lays down in bed with her, and she's talking about how she knows that she is dead, and she can hear the woods inside of herself, and just all of this stuff. And it was really, it was tough to watch and tough to listen to. Um, yeah, but she's the one who comes back, and she gets killed. She comes back. She is the one who goes over to Judd's house, and